Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are continuing to look at the life of King Saul. And today we are going to look at jealousy and the dangers of jealousy, but specifically the dangers that jealousy posed on Saul. And so with that, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18. We're going to be looking at verses 1 to about 16, with a little bit in the second part of chapter 16, but really in chapter 18. But really verses 1 through 16 is what we are going to be looking at today. So David and Goliath, that passage is done. And Saul has been hiding, and then he just says, "Oh, good job, David. Well done." And now, though, something else is happening that is going to cause issues with Saul and David. And let's see what that is. Verse 1. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, that's probably talking about David, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Again, David. That Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul sent him over the men, or set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So you have this friendship really just blossom between David and Jonathan. And the problem with that is, which causes, I think, some of the jealousy with Saul, not just pride, but the problem with it is that you are having your heir apparent, which is Jonathan, as Saul, your son, your oldest son, your heir apparent, befriending somebody that is very well liked and is starting to come up and up. And what we're going to see here in a second is starting to get fame. And that to a king, specifically one that is not in tune to the heart and word of God, would be seen as a huge obstacle and a huge threat to your kingship. Because even though you as the king are not going to live forever, your influence and your fame will live on through your son, which for Saul would be Jonathan. But Jonathan is becoming more and more better friends with David, which Saul is probably starting to see as a little bit of a threat. And so I think it's interesting that in verse 5, it's seen as good amongst the Israelites, and it's seen as good amongst Saul's servants that David is no longer this harp player. He's no longer an armor bearer. He's now seen as just this successful warrior that's spending a lot more time around the castle, let's say castle, but who's also spending a lot of time around the family of Saul, which we'll get to that later on. And but it's interesting that verse 5 makes no mention that Saul saw it as good. It's almost like he sees this as just a natural thing to do because of how David has helped him out personally, specifically with the passage with Goliath. He definitely has helped Saul. But now Saul is starting to see David as somebody that's helping Saul into somebody that's becoming a threat. And so let's get into that in verse 6. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So everything in verses 1 through 5 is very much a general overview of the friendship of David and Jonathan. But now we go right back to after after the time of chapter 17, the Goliath and David passage. We go right back to after that. So everything with the friendship of David and Jonathan in verses 1 through 5 comes after the statement by the women that really starts to really make Saul angry and jealous, as we see in verse 8. But we'll get to that just a second. The idea with Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s, on the surface does not look like a huge knock against Saul, because Saul definitely has done things. That's not the issue here. The problem is that they are giving so much more credit to David. Now, why is that, though? I think it's probably just because of the threat that Goliath posed. Because again, verses 6 through and 7 are happening right after the events of chapter 17. So at this point, David has not really killed 10,000s himself personally. However, he has killed Goliath, and that is this massive just moment. And of course, that then helps for the Israelites to rout the Philistines, which happens at the end of chapter 17. So I think this is really telling that the people are just really focused on the fame and the what the kings do for them, instead of how do the kings point us to God. And I think that is really what they care about, based on verses 6 and 7. But now Saul gets angry about this. Verse 8. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. He's kind of right to be just a little bit annoyed at this saying. Now, very angry, and to the displeasure that it comes upon, or what he does with that anger, it is wrong. And we'll see that in just a second. But I understand why he's a little bit annoyed, especially because David personally probably didn't kill 10,000s in chapter 17, but he did kill Goliath. But I understand why he's annoyed, but how he festers that is the problem. And for us as followers of Jesus, it's very, and really not just followers of Jesus, but anybody, but specifically followers of Jesus, we have to be really, really watchful that jealousy doesn't spread into something else. We are going to be jealous of things. We still live in a sinful world. We still sin, even though we follow after Jesus. But where the difference should be is that when we see that we are becoming jealous, we as followers of Jesus should go, "Oh man, I really don't want this to blossom into something that it never was supposed to be," whether that's hate or anger or envy or just something like that. I don't want that to balloon into more and more and more. And so I need to humble myself and make sure that I am not jealous over something that clearly, in this passage here, clearly the Lord wanted David to be the one that had the victory in chapter 17, which, by the way, David credited to the Lord. Yes, David had victory, but David made sure he credited to the Lord. But clearly that's what the Lord wanted to happen with the events of chapter 17. And so Saul should have said, "Okay, I'm starting to get a little bit jealous of this, but before I let this fester into anger and what I believe will be hate in a second, I should humble myself and realize that God is wanting this young man to be a part of Israel. And I need to ask what I am supposed to do to help this young man, or he to help me." That's how he should have responded. But that's not how he responded. So he keeps a watch on him in verse 9, and then in verse 10, it just falls apart. Verse 10. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand. And you can see where this is going, right? And verse 11. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall, which is attempted murder, by the way. But David evaded him, not just once, but twice, as verse 11 says. So David evaded him twice, which is just crazy to think about. But it's just this idea, again, that jealousy or a sin can blossom into another. And here it's not just anger, but I think it's full on hatred that Saul has for David in this moment. He attempts to murder him. And David thankfully didn't die in this moment, but that is what happened. But because of this, though, it causes Saul some issues again. Verse 12. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had left from Saul. Saul understands that things are changing, and change is hard. And especially if you've been in one role for so long, whether it's at your job, whether it's even a family dynamic or something like that, and change is definitely happening, it's hard to give up something that you've been doing. It's hard to do that. But when God clearly is showing the way to this change, what should you do? Well, definitely don't throw a spear at that person. Instead, surrender in humility to what the Lord is having for his will. Because guess what? Even if you're not in the exact role that you have been in, God has something for you to do. In this manner, sadly, it's to show that Saul has completely rejected the Lord. But for us who have accepted the Lord, even if we've been in a role for a while, especially in, let's say, our church or in our job, and God is wanting us to go in a different route or bring somebody to take our position, we should surrender that in humility. Is it difficult? Yes. But is that what we should do as believers? Yes, absolutely. And Saul does not do that. Verse 13. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. So Saul, in his jealousy and in his anger, no longer sees him as the heart boy, kicks him out of the palace, and instead puts him in the field and to be a commander, thinking that, well, maybe if he's commander of 1,000, which, by the way, I think that's ironic, he puts him in control of 1,000 instead of 10,000, like the women sang in verse 7. But anyways, I just find that ironic. But instead, it completely blows up in his face. That 1,000 does really, really well, militarily speaking. David has success as the commander of that 1,000, most likely meaning it grew and grew, or they had just victory and victory and victory because of that 1,000 that was commanded by David. And so because of that, the people of Israel actually become more and more in love with David. And so Saul's jealousy actually digs him deeper and deeper into the hole of, well, probably just more jealousy. And so because of that, he thinks he thinks that great way to resolve this is to give David his daughter in marriage. Now, which granted was part of the quote unquote reward for killing Goliath in chapter 17. But this is finally happening, and again, it should be a cause of celebration, but it's not for Saul. Verse 17, that Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And David said to Saul, who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Maholathite for a wife. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And then the rest of that chapter, I'd love for you to take a look at. Would take a look at a later time. But the thing that really catches my eye with this is the last few verses. Verse 28, but when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. So at this point, the life of King Saul is kind of shifted. It's more this connection and this back and forth with David. And that's really interesting, I think, to see. But it really does show, again, just the dangers of jealousy and how jealousy can really just fester into more and more troubling things like anger and hatred. And we definitely see that here in 1 Samuel chapter 18. So thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today, and we will continue to look at the life of King Saul and sadly see Saul not just get more into anger with David, but tried to kill him again, sadly. On Thursday, we will take a look at that with 1 Samuel chapter 19. So I will see you then. Thanks.